Welcome to Fossil Ridge Games. In this video, we're going to explore a Goblin deck for Magic the Gathering, and all of the cards in this video are from the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms expansion set. Since this is a Goblin deck, what I'm recommending is throw several copies of the Hobgoblin Bandit Lord into your deck. I have 3 of them in this example deck. They are rare. It's going to buff all of your goblins, and what's cool about it is that you can also trigger an effect on them. It says Hobgoblin Bandit Lord deals damage equal to the number of goblins that enter the battlefield under your control this turn to any target. So you can use this to kind of wipe out some sort of mid-grade targets. So maybe your enemy's bringing out some creatures, or you want to chip away at the other player's life point total. You can totally use this, and as you're going to see, you can bring out a fair number of goblins every turn, and you can sustain sort of the generation of goblins if you do this correctly. Next up is the Battlecry Goblin, and there are 3 copies of this style of goblin in the deck as well. What's great is it has like a pumpable effect. So for 1 colorless mana and a red mana, goblins you control get +1 and haste until the end of the turn. Now remember, since this is not a tappable effect, let's say you have 4 mana, you got 2 red and 2 colorless, you can pump this ability twice. So you can give all of your goblins a +2 to attack. In conjunction with the Hobgoblin Bandit Lord, these are some pretty sizable bonuses. Something else that's really cool about this card, and it makes it really easy to play, is that if you're pumping your goblins attack up anyway, and then you attack, you can trigger Pack Tactics. And what's great about this is that when the Battlecry Goblin engages in attacks with the mob that's attacking the other player, if your power total is 6 or greater, it generates a red goblin creature token. So what's kind of cool about that is just simply by attacking, you're going to be generating another token goblin creature, and you're going to be able to build up a swarm pretty quickly. The downside to this is that obviously your Battlecry Goblin will be a tasty target for your enemy. They want to block it and wipe it out, so you can stop doing this pack tactic effect. But once you sort of get control of the game and you start sort of running over your opponent, and maybe their defenders are starting to dwindle, you can start generating tons and tons of tokens, and it gets really out of control really quickly. Next up are some 2 larger goblins, and these will also gain the benefits from both the Battlecry and the Bandit Lord that we already talked about. The first is a Swarming Goblin. This one is a lot of fun. For 5 mana, you put a 4/3 goblin onto the table, and then you get to roll a 20-sided die. And what's cool about it is that, let's say you roll a 20, you can create 3 goblin tokens, but at a very minimum, you're going to get 1 additional goblin token, but, kind of oftentimes you're going to end up with 2. So for just playing this card out, you're going to get the 4/3 goblin, and then up to 3 additional goblin tokens as well. That's fantastic, and it synergizes really well with the Battlecry Goblin and the Bandit Lord. Next up, we have the Hulking Bugbear. And I always love things with haste. Red is a great color. There's a lot of haste creatures in red. And for just 3 mana, you can drop down a 3/3 attacker, and you can attack with it immediately when you put it into play during your turn. It won't have summoning sickness. So this is really cool too, and since it's a goblin, it will also synergize with the Battlecry Goblin and the Bandit Lord. Next up is probably one of the coolest cards from this entire set, and it's the Grim Wanderer. This is actually a goblin. It's a goblin warlock. So it's going to gain the abilities from both of your buffer type style goblins. But what's great about this thing is that it's a flash card, and it's a 5/3. It only costs 2 mana. So this thing hits like a freight train, super cheap to cast. The only downside to this is that you can only cast it if a creature died this turn. And quite honestly, this isn't really a big deal. With this many goblins that you have, they're all very small. It's very common for something to die on your turn, or even somebody else's turn. So I don't really find this casting that restrictive. In addition, since it is a goblin, it's really fantastic. You can get it buffed up as well. And like I said, this thing hits like a freight train, and it's fantastic. So I recommend playing a full set of these things in your deck, and you will enjoy it. We just talked about things dying pretty often when you're playing this deck. Warlock class is another card. There's 2 copies of this in this deck that kind of takes advantage of it. So just at the level 1, if something died during your turn, you can trigger this effect and your opponent just loses 1 life. In addition to this, you know, once you hit the final level, which is kind of rare, I haven't honestly been able to do that, I think more than maybe 2 or 3 times, but your enemy's going to lose life equal to the damage that they suffered. So it's kind of a way to almost like double it up. So if you're getting really close to the end of the game, and this is definitely an end game effect, even if you hit them for like 4 or 5, that's going to be pretty devastating to their life point total, and they're going to lose the game very quickly. So once again, this synergizes really well with this deck because things are dying all the time. You have a lot of tiny, small, weenie creatures that keep passing away. Orcus, Prince of Undeath, is a great way to sort of restore your battle line if it gets kind of ravaged. Obviously, your enemies want to wipe out your commanders, your Battlecry Goblins, and your Hobgoblin Bandit Lords. So if you start suffering a lot of casualties, the secondary effect on the bottom of this card is return up to X target creature cards with total mana value of X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. They gain haste until the end of the turn. What's kind of cool about this, if your battle line starts getting dismantled, you can use this to restore it and pull some of those commander goblins out of your discard pile. Something else that's great about this, it's a flying trample creature. It also hits pretty hard. So in conjunction with the Warlock class, let's say you hit them for 5 because it's a flyer and you have the Warlock class maxed out, they're going to suffer 10 points of damage, which is pretty devastating. These cards are not goblins, but I really enjoy Death Touch. It's a great way to keep bigger creatures off the battlefield. And if anything really crazy pops or spawns on the battlefield, you can wipe them out pretty quickly. The one on the left is probably the most versatile, and it's probably the easiest to get because it's a common card, but it's just a 2/2 Death Touch. And what's cool about it is you can venture into the dungeon, and then the one on the right, it buffs a little bit when you roll like a 20-sided die, and you can use it to amp up its attacks. Sometimes it goes up in attack power if you get some of the higher numbers, but it also gains Death Touch. Now, you can only use the Death Touch when it is attacking, so this ability only triggers when the rogue is attacking, so this is not a good blocker. But use this stuff, these cards, to wipe out bigger threats on the battlefield, and then that allows your goblins to sort of spawn out of control. Use Magic Missile or any other sort of red direct damage spell to maintain your superiority on the battlefield. Use Magic Missiles to chip away at unblockable foes. Maybe it's something that has Thieves' Tools, or maybe it's a flyer. So anything that you're having problems with, try to use Magic Missile to wipe out those targets. And the final card that I want to talk about is the Basel Beholder. These cards, they're kind of expensive. It costs 6 to bring out. They're a 6/5 creature, which is fantastic. They hit really hard. But what can really cause a lot of havoc on the battlefield is the second effect on the bottom of this card. It's called Fear Ray. It says creatures you control gain menace until the end of turn. You're going to have a lot of creatures on the table, a lot of tokens. That is a nightmare to block for your opponent. If all of your creatures that you control gain menace, that means that all of your creatures have to be blocked by 2 or more of their blockers. So you're nullifying their battle line when it comes to blocking. And a lot of your swarm of goblins and your swarm of other creatures are just going to get right through. So the Basel Beholder is often an effect when you play it down. It kind of wipes out the other player. If they survive the assault, then you still have a 6/5 Beholder on the table. I mean, this thing is pretty crazy. And the great thing about it, it's a common card, so you can get these really easy. To summarize, the Goblin deck is a classic form. It's a classic deck that a lot of players experience when they get into Magic the Gathering. Since the very first set, the very first time that Magic the Gathering hit the table, Goblin decks have existed. And over the years, thousands and thousands of players have enjoyed Goblin decks. In the new Dungeons and Dragons Forgotten Realms expansion, I think they did a really great job at bringing this sort of classic deck back to the table. I encourage everybody to try out this cool Goblin deck or a variation of your own Goblin deck. And I want to thank you all for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.